Hey guys, anime fanfics here. This is chapters 62-64 of Obito's redemption story by Yaboy Assassin on Wattpad. Links to all stories are in the description below. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Chapter 62. Sakura felt a bit more confident now that she had more familiar help on her side. While Tayuya wasn't bad, she just couldn't trust her. Not after what she had said to her all those years ago. But that didn't matter in the heat of the battle. She had tried to work with the redhead, but the difference in personalities made it impossible for them to coordinate attacks against a stronger blow. She turned to Ino and Hinata with a small smile of confidence. But with them here now, it'll be different. Tayuya growled in anger, wiping the trail of spittle that had leaked out of her mouth. She knew that the man before her was stronger than her. Even if she hadn't showed her full abilities. But the fact that Sakura stood up before that overwhelming pressure while she could not shouldn't be possible. No matter the training she could have went through, it should have been impossible to just fight through it. She took her time to get to her feet, no longer looking at the dangerous man that had forced her to her knees. She was boring her eyes into a mop of pink hair, sneering like an animal. What could have given her such abilities? I might have been 2 years, but had she really caught up to her like that? As if she weren't training herself? Her hands squeezed tightly into fist with barely restrained anger. The cursed seal on her began to glow and spread around her body, adorning her skin with jagged, black marks. It seemed that all of the others could feel the rise in her chakra and turn to her just as artificial wind began to rise up around her. As such chakra, Hinata muttered, in awe. While the others could feel it, she could also see just how abundant it was. I was right about you. Continued Sasori, sadistically smirking. Interesting, indeed. You will truly be a wonderful addition to my collection. Sakura was first to snap from her shock and turned her attention back to the task at hand. Ino, Hinata, don't get distracted. The enemy's in front of us. We have to win. Both teens seemed to snap out of their stunned states at her words and turned to Sasori with determined gazes. They would not allow him to fight Gaara. Sasori had a glow of amusement in his eyes, looking directly into Sakura, who noticed his gaze and narrowed her eyes. Such conviction. I haven't seen a look like that in such a long time. Sakura tensed in anticipation of his next move when he rose his hand up. It fills me with excitement. Sakura's eyes widened when pressured water shot out of a tube in his hand. Watch out. Hinata warned, being the first one to see it due to her enhanced eyes, and leaped out of the way. Ino followed suit, albeit a bit more clumsily, and barely dodged it. But neither she nor Hinata realized that it was aiming for Sakura. When Sakura soon followed suit and leaped away to safety, the stream of water had followed after her, slicing down everything in its path. It's coming after me. Sakura thought, realizing its intention and moving away even further to keep away. Hey! A voice yelled out in complete anger. Sasori reacted quickly, dodging a flurry of punches from Tayuya. Sakura couldn't believe her eyes. What the hell was she thinking, attacking him head-on like that? Why the hell are you focusing on her? The strongest one of all is right in front of you. She yelled in fury, in between strikes that could have splintered trees. Sasori narrowed his eyes at her, focusing intensely and knocking her back with a fist that hit her square in the face. But his opponent wasn't deterred, to his surprise, and leapt back at him, sending strong strikes his way. Hinata, with me. Sakura yelled, passing the other teen up in an attempt to support Tayuya in her mad attack. She couldn't believe that Tayuya would attack all on her own. Hinata, though surprised, nodded and ran after her, focusing her Byakugan on their opponent. Ino knew where her strengths and weaknesses lied and held up a seal, deciding to mold her chakra so that she could take over her opponent. She only had experience with Sakura's abilities, so she would try to coordinate accordingly. Her eyes glowed with determination. I just need to catch him off guard. Tayuya let out a war cry, repeatedly slamming her fist into the puppeteer's arms as he put them in front of him to block the hits. Although he couldn't feel pain, Sasori could feel if any part of his body was being damaged or not immobile and useful as before, and this was definitely the case now as he was being slammed with merciless fist over and over in Taiyuya's rush of anger. But now he was getting angry. He leapt back with Taiyuya hot on his trail, but this time, he was smirking. The metal blades on his back began to whirl around, catching speed in no time at all. Taiyuya gasped, already in motion and unable to stop herself. The blades were inching closer with each second, and she felt the wind from just how close it was now. An inch away from her face. She closed her eyes, bracing for the pain. She felt nothing. She opened her eyes to see Sakura in front of her, blood running down her hands from having caught both blades. She saved her. This pink-haired nobody saved her. Shadows crossed over her face as she looked toward the ground, her fist clenching tightly. Sakura turned to her. "Hey, are you okay?" She gritted. Taiyuya's head shot up and her eyes stared into Sakura's orbs. Sakura gasped. She didn't know why. Maybe she was surprised? Taiyuya's look confused her as well. Wasn't she glad she saved her? From above, a kunai dropped into the ground and both Sakura and Sasori looked down to see a tag attached to it. Before either could move, it glowed up and blinded the both of them with intense light. Sakura felt herself grabbed and moved away as she closed her eyes tightly from the blinding light. When she came to, she was in the arms of Hinata with Taiyuya close behind, back to looking at the ground, but she was breathing heavily. "Hinata, was that you?" she asked. The meek girl nodded. "I didn't want him to attack you." "Why you shouldn't take your eyes off him like that, Sakura." "I know." She glanced at Taiyuya. "But I couldn't turn back to him." Hinata wondered what exactly that meant. But that blinding light was gone, so she turned her gaze back to their opponent. Sakura heard a thump behind her and turned to see that Ino had landed behind her. She felt her chakra building up. She was molding her chakra. Ino ran up to them. "I'm molding my chakra, so you guys need to hold him off. Then, I'll trap him with my jutsu for the win." Sakura nodded, agreeing with the plan. She turned back to Sasori. "We've got a plan. All we have to do now is get him in position for it." Sakura narrowed her eyes. "An all-out assault. That's what our roles need to be." Hinata nodded. It was all they could do. "Out of the way." Taiyuya yelled, racing forward. "Damn it, not again." Sakura yells in annoyance as both her and Hinata rush behind Taiyuya. They would have to improvise. "Don't worry about them." Taiyuya yells at Sasori. "I'm your true opponent. Not those bitches." Before she could even reach him, Sasori suddenly looks up, seemingly bored, surprising her. "You actually think someone like you can have the honor of being my opponent?" He brings up his arm and slams it into the side of her face, sending her flying into a sand building. "Don't flatter yourself." "Ha!" Sakura reels her fist back and brings it forward to slam into Sasori just as he turns to her. But it doesn't connect. Sakura's eyes widens in fear. He had just moved his head out of the way, casually, as if it didn't matter. With that damned bored expression on his face. A sword suddenly appears from his cloak and drops into his hand. His eyes widen in deadly intent and he drives his entire body forward, aiming to drive the sword through her gut. Sakura sees it and shifts violently. Though off balance, she's able to dodge being hurt seriously, but the sword did graze her side, drawing blood. She utters a grunt of pain before she is kicked away harshly. Sasori feels a presence slightly above him and looks up, seeing Hinata in the air, aiming to attack him from above. He smirks and opens his hand. Hinata sees a tube filled with many mechanisms that put her off slightly. But she's in that air and cannot stop her motion of attack. Her eyes widened when water spurts violently out of the hole. It's fast, but she reacts upon instincts, turning her body away just as the water shoots past her. She could thank her Byakugan for such foresight. She utters a grunt of pain before she is kicked away harshly. Sasori feels a presence slightly above him and looks up, seeing Hinata in the air, aiming to attack him from above. He smirks and opens his hand. It's not over yet. Sasori swings his arm and the water would have hit her had a nearly invisible force of air not slam into his arm. 8 trigrams, air poems. Sasori hadn't the time to react after that. Madly grinning Tayuya appeared in front of him, crouched low but obviously ready to attack. She had been the feistiest from this batch of girls and obviously didn't get along well with the others. She tried to strike him, but he dodged with relative ease and slammed a fist in her gut. She recoiled but remained determined, aiming a kick that would have slammed into the side of his head. He leaped back in time to dodge it and smirked confidently. The chakra feeding into his body made him tougher physically. Most puppeteers had a weakness to short-ranged fighting, and even though he had fixed that particular problem by making himself a puppet, the durability of his puppet body was not as strong as a human body. But with this power surging through him, it was different. He was forced to be reckoned with no matter what he did. "You'll never be able to hit me fighting like this," he told her, and she growled at him in anger. "But I do hope that this is not all you girls can do." Chakra bursted from his body at multiple points simultaneously. A scroll fell down from his cloak and fell into his hand. He unraveled it and a large puff of smoke erupted from it, covering his body in multiple meters around him in blinding smoke. Tayuya was forced to leap back so that she could see and watched alongside Hinata and Sakura as the smoke slowly disappeared. None of them could hold their surprise as 100 puppets floated above Sasori. A nervous sweat broke from Sakura's brow and forced herself to swallow. Her mind went back to Ino. She was still molding her chakra. They had only been fighting Sasori for maybe less than 5 minutes and made no leeway into actually beating him. And now he pulled this. Honestly, what a joke it was at this point. Just how much power was he hiding away? Hinata could hardly believe her eyes. These puppets were stronger than the average jounin. Their chakra levels were absurd. She couldn't believe that one could make regular puppets this strong. She was scared. Her Byakugan showed all the weapons that they held as well as all the ways they could be used. She realized with shaking fist that she would have to lead the charge if they were going to survive. Tayuya could feel the chakra in her skin. How strong was this bastard? How many techniques did he have? She remembered every time she rushed him. How useless he made her feel. She wouldn't experience that again. Her cursed seal of heavens glowed red. Newfound power surged through her as more of the seal spread across her face. She was in the strongest form of stage 1 she could be in. It was time to fight. Triple X. Temari's scalp finally could relax as she was dropped unceremoniously on a carpeted ground, a ground she recognized. "El Lady Temari?" An urgent voice called out in surprise. Temari forced herself to raise her head, ignoring her thundering headache at being dragged for nearly 30 minutes by her hair. Pakura had known exactly where to go, and could have used the body flicker to get there but decided to take the scenic route. Temari would make her pay for it. She looked eyes with a familiar annoyance of her life. The council. Her mouth spread agape in surprise as before her vision was blocked by Pakura's cloak. She had come around to stand in front of her, but what was she planning to do? Pakura stared at the council members, dragging her gaze across each one, enjoying the way they withered under it. Finally, she had looked at them all. Suddenly, the table in the room exploded into shards of shredded wood and fell to ground. While most of the council were former shinobi, the speed of which this was done, and their lack of seeing battle had them scream out as if they were civilians and duck away into safety. Well, as safe as one could be, trapped between an adversary and the only exit in the room. "Have you nothing to say?" Pakura asked after a moment of silence had passed. No one spoke. She hadn't expected that. She could tell they were surprised to see her, but she wanted to hear it. Heh, Temari chuckled, and Pakura turned to her. "You're not as important as you think. Bitch." She had barely finished before a foot slammed into her back, forcefully taking her breath away. She gasped for air violently before she was shut up when Pakura had grabbed her head, drove it into the ground. "Shut up, princess," she said, and smirked. "Learn some fucking manners when you're not being spoken to." With that done, she turned back to face the shocked elders. "Still nothing, huh?" A bright flames suddenly danced around her hand when she opened it, significantly heating up the room. "Perhaps burning one of you to ashes may do the trick." "Wait." One of the men finally called out, hand outstretched as if it would stop her had she actually wanted to go through with her threat. Finally, you open that shitty mouth of yours." She lets her flames die down before lowering her hand back to her side. "Pakura, I never expected you to be alive." How are you here?" he stuttered, nearly not even getting out his sentence. She chuckled. "So, that's the first thing you say, huh? No worry for me at all. You're just wondering how your plans for me failed. Honestly, I can't believe I ever served you people wholeheartedly." "Pakura," another council member said, gaining her attention. "It was a woman. Don't do something you will regret. Your death was necessary for the village's survival." The woman had no idea those would be her last words. She hadn't even been able to yell out in pain as her body was seared to ashes in an instant. The room turned a scorching orange and it felt as if the sun had been inside the room a quick second as the other council members watched their comrade be eaten alive by the horribly hot flames. Each one was surprised. It happened so fast. Neither of them even saw it. Hand raised, she turned to the others. "Now that you guys know I regret nothing I'm doing, don't try and lecture me. I know all about your plan. What your goal was. But I don't care. A shinobi should not be tools for a village. Human life is worth more than buildings and dirt. And since you all failed to see that, you all deserve death." A sadistic smirk crossed her face, and her jutsu surged anew in her hand, even hotter than before and growing in size with every passing second. "Just like all the shinobi before you, die protecting this piece of rock." But before she could release her technique that would have certainly destroyed the entire building they were in, something forced her to stop. She looked down and saw a shadow connected to hers. She was confused. "Not so fast." A voice drawled from behind her. "This might be a drag, but you won't be having your way. Triple X. I expected more of a challenge from the Kazekage's older brother, Deidara stood over a profoundly bleeding Kankuro, having soundly beat him in less than 2 minutes. His puppets laid broken into tiny pieces beside the teen, and looking at them, he felt a small bit of pride. His art had done that. He was invincible. But he needed to focus. He turned back to Kankuro, staring, but not outwardly glaring like he had been. He was no longer full of rage. But it didn't seem like that to Kankuro as the Akatsuki member slammed his foot onto the back of his wrist, feeling a sickening snap and enjoying it. First, he had screamed out. Then, only small whimpers. Deidara flipped him over on his back with a kick to the gut and put his foot on his chest. "I'll ask just one time, he started, voice low and serious. "The Kazekage, where is he?" Deidara had expected the teen beneath his foot to either answer his question or refuse. He hadn't expected sand to shoot at him out of nowhere and nearly knocking him to his feet. He had narrowly dodged, lucky enough to sense the chakras speeding toward him and fast enough to dodge soundly. "I'm right here." A furious Gaara muttered lowly. Deidara smirked, finally coming to a stop after sliding back a few meters. Now he wouldn't have to go hunting for him. He didn't expect to see several more shinobi come beyond the light dust surrounding them and stand aside Gaara as he kneeled down to look at his brother. He scanned the faces of the shinobi and hadn't reacted until he came across one he recognized. It was the tan girl, he realized with wide eyes. She was the Jinchuriki of the Seven Tails. But how was it possible that her large chakra slipped past them? They only sensed Gaara when they scouted the village beforehand, and intelligence never said anything about another Jinchuriki. Though most would have called their losses right then and there, Deidara smirked. 2 Jinchuriki for the trouble of 1. It seemed like he was a magnet for these beasts. Grinning like the madman he was, he held up both his hands, the tongues on them gushing out from the mouths. Gara of the sand and Fu of the hidden waterfall. Both of you shall meet your end here. Be happy. You're about to go out in the shining embrace of true art. Fu couldn't hide the way her face deadpanned, and she said dryly, "What is he going on about?" "So, this is the Akatsuki, huh?" Kiba said slowly, remaining calm on the exterior. His heart was beating like a drum though. He could smell strength. He knew that this was the real deal. Remain calm, Kiba. Was about the most comforting thing Shino could say. Shino hadn't felt slightly different at feeling the power of this adversary. Sure, it was nothing to just scoff at, but losing control was the worst thing one could do. At least, in his book. And he felt as if Kiba was about to lose control and not be able to fight properly. While most wouldn't notice it, he'd been around the teen long enough to tell the difference. Kiba glared sideways at him, a bit angry at being spotted, but nevertheless glad that he had someone like Shino. Shut it. I know that already. Gara's face suddenly shot up, eyes bloodshot in rage. The sand beneath him twisted violently, different from how it usually looked. It usually looked pristine and in perfect shape, but it was now jagged and wild, sand particles floating above it. He lifted his hand toward the explosion user and multiple tendrils of sand broke out from underneath him and sped at Deidara, shocking him with their speed. It was faster than ones that came at him before. He tried to get out of the way, but something held him down onto the ground below him. He looked down and saw himself ankle-deep in sand. He wouldn't get out in time, he knew that. His attention shot back to the speeding tendrils and he covered himself the brace for the impact. Instead of hitting him, like he expected and preferred, the sand wrapped around multiple parts of his body, tightly. He could feel the sand digging into his skin as it wrapped around his arms, chest, and the bigger parts of his legs. He tried to puff up his chest. He was losing his breath quite quickly. The tightest part of the sand was around his chest after all. He gritted his teeth to keep himself from yelling when the sand tightened once more. He didn't believe it could happen. To think, he began in his head and grinned. That I could be pushed so far as to use one of my new techniques. These urchins will pay for this. Suddenly, chakra split through the sand shining brightly that ever other shinobi was forced to cover their eyes, and even then they could still see it. But, this was no ordinary blinding jutsu. It was a jutsu that completely threw off one's senses. Deidara smirked, feeling the sand on him loosen until it was hanging off him. He loved the technique. While others couldn't see through the blinding light his body was illuminating, he could. And he used it to his advantage. He jumped up into the air, forcing the sand off his body. He chose this time to finally release the technique as he couldn't use any of his other abilities while using this one. Before he could land on the ground, his hand spat out a small clay bird and he threw it underneath before it went to its full size and brought him up to the air. Gara glared at the bird. Deidara was harder to fight once he made it to the sky. I'll make you pay for forcing me to use my C5 technique. He clasped his hands together, molding his chakra. You aren't the only one who can fly. Fu announced loudly, throwing herself at Deidara with wings fluttering from her back rapidly. Kiba's eyes nearly popped from his head. She can fly? Shino, with a swing of his hand, sent a swarm of his special insects at Deidara. He would take advantage of the distraction Fu naturally provided. Gara saw this, and quickly sent more tendrils of sand at Deidara from right underneath his clay bird, aiming to catch the teen off guard from beneath. Deidara only smirked. He looked away from them. They didn't matter to him anymore. He had a work of art in his hands. A C3 bomb even smoother than the one before, took his attention. It was time, he decided, to capture the Jinchuriki. Enough, Deidara. Deidara blinked. That voice, it sounded like pain. Was he being contacted through that jutsu? Annoyed at being interrupted, but nevertheless unwilling to defy his leader, he sent chakra into his bird. It beefed it and sent a huge gust of wind with a flap of its wings, sending the attack coming at it scattered and useless, as well as sending Fu on her back. He looked back at them from high above. You got lucky today, But it won't happen again. Watch your back, Jinchurikis. He sent them a critical eye. I'll be coming for you. With that last message, he flew away high into the air, far away. Triple X. Sasori swung his body, the strings connected to it bringing the puppets forward in an large army-like attack. The girls looked on in astonishment and prepared to clash with the puppets until this suddenly stopped. Sakura was confused openly for a moment. She quickly scanned all the puppets and then at Sasori. She found that he was muttering to himself, though she couldn't very well hear it. Understood, I'll leave. Tayuya trailed off, copying the words muttered by Sasori. She wondered what exactly he was talking about. And why the hell was he talking to himself like that? Why did he stop? Hinata voiced what they had all been thinking. With her Byakugan, she could lip read and see that he was muttering to himself. He had no earpiece or anything, so he couldn't have been talking to somebody. Before anyone could answer her question, Deidara appeared before them on his giant bird, looking at the battlefield they had been fighting on. He turned to Sasori. Seems like you were in the middle of something, I was. Sasori confirmed, leaping up onto his bird. He opened a scroll and completed a hand seal. Immediately, the puppets from his infamous jutsu sped into the seal and it closed when all 100 were in. He grabbed it and tucked it away on his person. He turned back to them. Consider yourselves safe, for now. Leaving no other words, he motioned for Deidara to take off. A second later, they were gone, leaving 4 female teens confused as to why they were retreating. Triple X. Pakura sneered at the ponytail of the man that had captured her shadow. With her body the way it was all she was able to see at the moment. As she tried to use her strength to break free from the Nara's control, a familiar face slipped from the ceiling, smiling eerily. Its unusual black and white, plant-like appearance only helping. As usual, no one noticed him. Until he spoke. I'm disappointed in you, Pakura. To get trapped in a shadow paralysis jutsu is unbecoming of you. All participants in the room looked up and was startled by the man coming out of the ceiling. Shikamaru was the first to notice the red clouds. Choji, he called. Now. Choji sent chakra to his hand and tried to slam it onto the Akatsuki member. Black Setsu slipped back into the ceiling, avoiding the hit, then surprised Shikamaru, coming out of the ground and grabbing onto his ankle. Thrown off, he forgotten all about his jutsu, allowing Pakura to easily escape. She swung her body, releasing a torrent of scorch style as Zetsu slipped back into the ground. Shikamaru would have even been able to cover himself from just how fast it was, but it didn't even hit him as Choji stepped in front of him, taking the hit like the tank he was. Unfortunately, while it didn't burn that badly because of the lack of chakra in it, as well as Choji's armor, the concussive force sent them through the door that it came in and into the wall in the hallway. It nearly caved underneath the pressure. Damn fools. She held up a hand filled with chakra. Die. Zetsu slipped out of the ground beside her and grabbed her wrist. That's enough, he said. Our leader has told us to leave immediately. It's time to go. Deidara will be picking you up. Pakura immediately reined in both her chakra and emotions and lowered her arm as Zetsu let go of it. She sent a last look at the shocked council and then looked back up at Zetsu. Fine. Let's go. Chapter 63. Tsunade wished badly for sake. She'd been stuck at her desk, writing out reports, and waiting for the one that was causing her severe stress at the moment. A report back from Suna. It was her fault, though, really. She'd already known that the Akatsuki were going to show up before the Chunin exams and try and get Gaara. But she destroyed those reports before anyone else could see them. She knew that none of her Jonin senseis would agree to send their children out on their own when they knew the Akatsuki would be arriving. Truthfully, it was deceiving on her part, but she was sure Hokage did worse things. She just hoped no one died and that they could pull through. She had a couple of questions for them, regardless if they protected Gaara or not. A small click reached her ears, and she didn't have to look up to know that it was Shizen coming through the door, as she hadn't always knocked before she waltzed in. Well, it wasn't like she wasn't in here as much as Tsunade. She cleared her throat. "Anything yet?" she asked, looking up. "I'm afraid not, Lady Tsunade," she said and then frowned. "What's got you so stressed, my lady? You should rest if you are tired. I don't think Shikaku-san would mind doing a bit of paperwork for you." While it sounded good, Tsunade couldn't risk anyone getting their hands on any reports. "No thank you, Shizune. I'm just fine." She sighed and tapped her fingers on her desk. Shizen sighed herself, fixing Tantan in her arms as she left the room. Why did Tsunade look so impatient? Was there something to be this stressed about? Sure, the kids were on a mission that the Akatsuki had a small chance to show up at, but they were there to just make sure Gaara was being protected and for the Chunin exams. She found herself walking out of the Hokage office entirely. Perhaps it was the mission Kakashi was leading with going to escort Sasuke from Orochimaru's new ninja village. Yes, she thought, that was probably it. Now that she thought about, she was a bit worried about that too. What was Orochimaru planning running his own ninja village? There were even rumors that he experimented on the shinobis who lived there, making them stronger than regular ones were. The poor shinobi. She just wished he wasn't crazy enough to try something stupid against someone like Kakashi. He was stupidly strong after all, but against someone like Kakashi, it practically meant nothing. Wrapped up in her own thoughts, when tapped on the shoulder, she panicked, grabbed the hand that touched her and went underneath it as she twisted it. She would have broken it had the other person not been faster, reversing her grip with ease and breaking the hold. It had been Ebisu, she realized as he shook his hand to make it feel better. "Oh, Ebisu-kun." She bowed, apologetically. "I'm sorry, I was lost in my thoughts and you startled me." "It's no problem," he assured. "Besides, I just got to show my students a reversal, which will be put next lesson." "Hey, that was kinda cool," Konohamaru said, he and his teammates stepping from behind their teacher. He looked at her. "I didn't know you could fight like that." "Well, you haven't seen me fight then." She smiled, bending down and poking the young Saratobi on the nose. She nearly laughed when he pushed her away, embarrassed. "Hey, I'm going to be Hokage. Hokages don't get poked on the nose," he yelled out in indignation, folding his arms with a pout. "Well, we don't really know that for sure," Udon muttered. "The Hokages have been kids too." "Shut it, Udon," came swiftly. Moegi was still marveling the quick movements. "How did you do all of that with Mr. Taunton in your arms?" Shizen smiled lightly at the girl and put a finger to her lips. "It's a secret. A shinobi secret. We can keep shinobi secrets," Konohamaru said, jumping to the side of his teammate, excited. "The secret?" he breathed out in a whisper. "Tell me." Before she could respond, a glimpse of another familiar face caught her attention. But she wasn't the only one to notice him. "Oh, Asuma? I didn't expect to see you here. Weren't you on break?" Ebisu asked after waving the stronger shinobi down. Konohamaru turned to look behind him. "Uncle Asuma?" Asuma came over with a small wave and a nod at his nephew. "Hey guys. I'm here to see the Hokage. Apparently, there's something urgent going on at the capital," he said, scratching his head. Noticing how his face and body wasn't relaxed as it always was, Shizen grew serious herself. The capital city? Her mind went back to Tsunade. Was that the reason she was stressed? He nodded. "Don't have many details myself, but it sounded urgent. Something about potentially being in A-class." Konohamaru's eyes nearly bulged out of his head at hearing the rank. Then he grinned. He had begun to run to the Hokage's office, surprising all the other shinobi. An A-rank mission is just what we need. Enough with the stupid D ranks. He shouted as he ran. Hey, Konohamaru, stop. Ebisu ran after his student and soon after Moegi and Udon followed, leaving an amused Shizune and Asuma. He seems like a handful. Asuma muttered. Shizune stifled a laugh, watching Ebisu scream and run in the distance. Yes, it seems so. Shall we go as well? He nodded. No time like now. Triple X. While that situation unraveled on the ground, a single man stood high on the fourth Hokage's headstone. His favorite spot in the entire village. How funny was that? The man he helped kill before was now one he confided to, well, his statue. It brought him peace. Yeah, he hadn't and wouldn't get responses to his questions, but it felt good enough to just voice them out. He had probably been more silent than ever before. Time was approaching. It wouldn't be long until the fourth ninja war reared its ugly head. He hadn't actually had the time to think about the things that would happen before then. The Akatsuki, the other nations, Orochimaru and his followers, and Danzo. He was worried. There was so much. So much he had to leave up to chance. Up to the next generation. He thought back to Boruto. But it's still around until at least the next 20 years. But I can't afford to get lazy. That was because of the choices I make. His thoughts immediately vanished when 3 chakra signatures suddenly disappeared and then appeared near him. A couple of meters away from him. He recognized them before he even turned around. Guys? He questioned, seeing all 3 of his students. Sensei. They all greeted at once. What's going on? He asked, curious. They'd never come to him all at once like this before. Well, we were all thinking and decided that we haven't trained in a while. Just the 4 of us. Shursui answered, smiling. We were wondering if you were up to it. Oh, and we aren't taking no for an answer. He said playfully. Izumi sent him a look and elbowed him in the stomach but didn't say anything to disagree. We'd like to train with you, sensei. Obito was surprised to hear this. They were right. He was actually barely even around. He'd spent this last year just trying to find a way to enter the dimension he discovered after experimenting with Yoroshiki's chakra. But still, he felt as if they weren't telling him everything. Are you sure that all you want? He gave Shursui a look specially. He jumped slightly, nervous, and abnormally large sweaty began to come down his face. Why yeah, of course. What else would it be? Obito deadpanned and looked at all of them. Izumi was pointedly looking away from him. Then he looked at Itachi, who hadn't even physically reacted at all and was staring him dead in the eye. We want you to answer some questions. If we win, you must do so. Itachi stared, shocking his clansmen by just saying it so blatantly like that. But he felt no need to keep it from them. It was bound to slip from one of them anyway. So that's what this is? Obito knew it was something. Shursui opened his mouth to explain, but Obito had used the body flicker to disappear before he could get a word out. Obito found himself at the largest training field in the entire village. Exactly where he wanted to be. He turned behind him when Shursui appeared a second after he did, followed by Itachi and Izumi after a couple of seconds. Shursui noticed the location. So, you aren't running away after all. I considered it. He joked dryly. Izumi frowned at the joke. We just want you to talk, sensei. You don't open up to anyone anymore. You used to talk way more. She said softly. Obito wanted to sigh. Of course they would notice. I figured you would eventually come to me about this. If I would have ran, you guys would have just followed after me until we spoke. You shouldn't concern yourselves about me. I'm just fine. I told you all this. I don't believe that, sensei. Itachi looked as unconvinced as he sounded. Something is wrong. And there's something you aren't saying. I want an explanation. He's right, sensei. Shisui brought his hand up and cracked his knuckles. Sorry, but if you won't just say, we'll have to fight it out of you. Izumi nodded in agreement and grabbed both the handles on the swords on her right waist, staring intently at him. Obito saw the conviction in their eyes. They wouldn't back down. While he could just escape into the Kamui dimension to sneak away, he knew it would never last him. And it was a disservice to him. While he needed no one to care for him, the fact that they were willing to fight him for answers made his chest hurt. He didn't deserve that. Then come. When those words escaped his mouth, he found himself in a complete darkness instead of the open and brightly lit up training field. He was confused at first and a bit scared, but then he felt the fluctuation in his chakra as someone had put their chakra into his body. A genjutsu. He realized. He activated his Sharingan and immediately broke out of the illusion. He came back to reality to see Shisui a hair's length away from his face. He reacted as quickly as he could, drawing a kunai from his cloak and clashing it against the steel of Shisui's tanto. He found himself in a complete darkness instead of the open and brightly lit up training field. He was confused at first and a bit scared, but then he felt the fluctuation in his chakra as someone had put their chakra into his body. A genjutsu. He realized. Shisui grinned, pushing up against him. Don't get caught off guard so easily, sensei. I know we've closed the gap between us and you. Really? Well, let's just see then. Obito tried to force Shisui's tanto down with his kunai, but instead of fighting back against him, Shisui disappeared before his eyes, throwing him off balance. He felt a presence behind him and glanced quickly over his shoulder to see Izumi swinging her swords at him. He ducked underneath her large swing and performed a handstand, bringing feet up at her. She blocked it but was sent back by the force of the kick. Obito looked up in time and jumped off the ground with his hands to dodge the flaming shuriken that spun rapidly underneath him as it passed. Itachi's technique. He realized. He was forced to lower himself to ground to avoid another shuriken before jumping and spinning his body midair to dodge two more that had came from his sides at once. Just as he landed, he pulled several kunai out of his, imbuing them with water chakra and sending them at his shuriken with precise precision. They hit the shuriken and cancelled each other out, falling to the ground. Shisui appeared above him out of nowhere and nearly split his body in half with a flaming slash that left the ground scarred badly. Obito skidded to a halt a couple of meters away, completely unharmed. He was able to get up and leap away before Shisui got to him. Izumi didn't give him time to rest as she leaped high into the air with a hand cupped around her mouth. Fire style, fireball jutsu. She exclaimed, releasing a large fireball that scarred the ground as it traveled to him. He went through his own seals and noticed that her fireball was not the only one coming at him. Another one was behind him and he could feel Itachi's chakra from it. Water style, water wall. He exclaimed, shooting water out of his mouth with enough force that it slammed against the earth below violently and washed all around him. The fireball slammed into his jutsu and steam erupted everywhere as they cancelled the other out. Appearing above the steam with the body flicker, Shisui had did his own seals. Wind style, great breakthrough. He exclaimed, releasing a giant gust of wind that slammed into the ground below and dispersed the steam. Shisui landed on the ground, never taking his off of the crater his jutsu caused. He didn't realize that the technique never even touched Obito. Obito slipped out of the ground silently behind Shisui, but Shisui noticed him and turned around with a kunai in hand, surprised to see it go through his neck. Itachi saw Obito raise his hand toward Shisui as the blade went through his neck. He knew how Kamui worked and knew that once Shisui passed his, he would grab him and force him into the Kamui dimension. Itachi wouldn't let it happen. He activated his own Mangekyo Sharingan and blood ran down from his eye. Amaterasu. Obito glanced to his side to see black flames rushing to him and saw Itachi behind them. Itachi saw what he was about to do and fought ahead of him. Clever. He thought, and let the flames pass him so he could remain unhurt. They hit the ground and ignited into a wall of flames. Shisui took that moment to leap back for space and Obito followed his movements, wanting to get away from the black flames as to not be cornered. Itachi gripped his bleeding eye and looked at Izumi land beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked, knowing what the technique could do to him. He nodded. "I'm fine." He then turned his attention back to Obito. Still as quick as ever. Izumi followed his gaze to Obito. "Yeah, he's keeping up with Shisui like it's no big deal." She agreed. The only time they caught him was when Itachi had immediately started the battle with his Sharingan activated and put Obito in a genjutsu briefly. Shisui gave a large grin, rolling his wrist and hearing a satisfying pop. "Good, sensei. You're taking this seriously, aren't you?" Obito stared blankly. Though, admittedly, he was excited to fight opponents as strong as them with no additional stakes or nothing to worry about. "Is that all you got? I was sure the fastest shinobi in the village would be able to hit me at least once," he teased. Shisui activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, excitement rocking through him. "Oh, I'll hit you alright." Itachi saw the way Shisui's body tensed and said, "Izumi attack sensei with Shisui. If he's going to attack, I'll plan accordingly." She nodded, readying both her body and her swords, gripping onto them. Shisui rushed forward with the body flicker, appearing right in front of Obito in an instant, faster than all the times before. Izumi leapt off her feet and sped through the air to catch up, deciding to play back foot. She would not catch up with Shisui and only tire herself out trying to. Shisui and Obito clashed weapons once more as Izumi attacked from the rear. Obito noticed her, pushed chakra into his arms so quickly that Shisui couldn't react and was forced down to the ground where his tanto was stomped into it. Obito ducked underneath Izumi's strike once more before grabbing Shisui by the back of his shirt and launching him at Izumi. She gasped in surprise but was fast enough to react, flipping over his body in midair and kicking down at her sensei. He blocked the strike but it sent him skidding along the ground. Izumi landed on the ground and immediately went through several seals. Obito saw this and copied her, forming his own jutsu from seeing hers as fire-based. He was soon showed to be correct, as she released a torrent of fire at him. But before he reacted to it, it suddenly exploded before it was even halfway toward him. Fire style, exploding flash. Blinding light created from the explosion forced his eyes closed from how intense it was. But he wouldn't be a standing target. He leapt back to give himself space and to try and get out of the field of bright light, feeling the chakra wasn't extended too far away from his reach. "Not so fast," Shisui said from above the field of light, cupping his hand around his mouth. Wind style, gale palm. With a single movement from his hand, he sent wind so powerful that it extended the jutsu miles away, almost to the edge of the clearing. Obito felt that change, but he only smirked. They were strong. Stronger than he thought. He was actually having trouble. While he praised them mentally, he knew that this was far from over. "Sorry, but I don't really want to spill." He forced his right eye open, his Mangekyo blazed wildly as his eye burned from the intense light. Kamui. His right eye began to suck the jutsu away. While it was light, it was created by a jutsu and therefore he could absorb it with no issue. "My jutsu is weakening." Izumi noticed instantly, her Sharingan easily seeing it lose its surface area. It didn't take her long to see why. "Sensei's absorbing it." Itachi hummed, he could see this too. "It's moving to a single spot on his face. He's using Kamui to absorb it. We don't have much time to come up with a plan." He gripped his eye briefly as blood ran down from it once more. Amaterasu. Obito sensed a chakra coming through the jutsu with incredible speed but soon saw it was the famed black flames. It had no effect on him, simply falling victim to the suction of his jutsu and disappearing into his Kamui dimension. Itachi saw this. "Damn it," he muttered. Attack like that wouldn't work on him when he was like that. Shisui appeared beside them, giving them a big smirk. Itachi and Izumi wondered just what he was smirking for, but they didn't have to ask. Shisui tugged softly on a loose wire that almost seemed invisible to them, even with their Sharingans. He's all tied up. But he won't notice until I pull this wire. When he's trapped, I'll try to hit him with a dragon flame jutsu, but he's most likely going to dodge it. Where should we go from there? He asked. Itachi took no time in figuring out a strategy. And told them. Obito finished sucking up the jutsu and turned to his students. Seeing them not move, he grew curious. I see you aren't attacking me. Is that all you got? Sasuke smirked and tugged on the wire in his hand quickly. Obito's eyes widened in surprise and he began to hear multiple sounds of wire snapping all around him. A trap. Sasuke brought his hand all the way behind him. It's time to finish this. Multiple strings of ninja wire flew all around him and he took out a kunai, cutting any ones that seemed to get close to him. But the number didn't seem to decrease at all. His eyes widened and he looked down quickly to see multiple wires surrounding his leg. The distraction caused by it made him not react to several more which wrapped around his arms, chest and neck, locking him into place. It's time, sensei. Sasuke yelled. Fire style, dragon flame jutsu. Fire swept up all around Sasuke, forming into a dragon before shooting along the wire, causing it to spilt in several different directions. Obito's eyes widened at the jutsu and he reacted without thinking, releasing giant bolts of electricity from his body that traveled along the wire and slammed furiously into the flames. The attack exploded on contact, lighting up the training field in bright colors. Amaterasu! Itachi exclaimed, another line of blood sweeping down his face as he sent black flames to aid the regular ones. In an explosive display, the fire began to overpower the lightning, forcing them back and Obito to concentrate his power even more. He felt the ground shake violently and turned in time to see flames surrounding Izumi as she aimed a flying kick that was a second away from his face. She surrounded herself in flames to remove his chance at injuring her with his lightning, and he could preform any other jutsu while his hands were tied up. Kamui would be useless as he would transport the technique Sasuke and Itachi were using and get injured by the Izhi jutsu would release when he went to the Kamui dimension. And if he used his left eye, he would maim her. The powerful foot slammed into his face. The air cracked around the attack and a sonic boom erupted, sending Obito flying away violently, still wrapped in his restraints. He counterbraced his fall and slammed into the ground, rocking the earth and caused a huge crater from the impact. Yes. Sasuke said, excited. She got him. Itachi nodded with a small smile. Indeed. Izumi grinned, clenching both her fists as a feeling in her chest swelled up. She felt immense pride. I got him. She said to herself. Yeah, you got me. Izumi blinked. That voice did not come from the crater, it came from behind her. She and the rest of her clansmen turned to see Obito standing tall on a tree with its leaves blown off. Though, he looked worse for wear. His cloak was in tatters and blood came down the side of his head. She had kicked and blood from the side of his mouth. But she saw no bruising or anything, like it should have been. Obito grinned in excitement, but it came off as sadistic. But I'm not down for the count. I've only played defense. Let's see what you can do when I'm on the offense. Chakra erupted around him suddenly and the tree cracked under the pressure of his chakra as parts of it began to float around his aura. Izumi smirked, getting into a fighting stance. Bring it. Itachi narrowed his eyes at the power and bent forward, ready to fight. Sasuke smirked as well, reading behind him and grabbing the hilt of his tanto. He readied his chakra, fire flowing around him freely. You won't be the only one on offense. Triple X. Hearing the multitude of booms in the distance, Shikaku groaned as water spilled out his bathtub with every boom. Damn it. Just one time. He shouted. Can there be one damn time where something troublesome doesn't happen? Shut up. He heard his wife yell out loudly and he shrinked back into the half-full tub, grumbling under his breath. Triple X. There was disarray in the halfway destroyed village of the sand. Shinobi and residents alike struggled to locate trapped people and find cover in case of more attacks. It wasn't until they heard the voice of their Kazekage did they get calm. Coast is clear. I repeat, The coast is clear. This is Gaara, the Kazekage speaking. Shinobi need to locate any trapped civilians and bring them to emergency tents that have already begun to be set up in the center of Ever District. Any injured are to be transported immediately and civilians are to be brought to the strongholds of each district until further notice. For the sake of the village, please lend me your aid quickly. With that last word said, the communication was cut off. But all people of the sand heard their leader loud and clear and followed instructions. Meanwhile, Ino fell back in exhaustion before being caught by a worried Sakura. "Are you all right?" she asked. Ino nodded shortly. "Yeah, just a little strained. I haven't connected to that many people at once. I'm not sure it got to everyone." Shikamaru put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry about it. You did great." The compliment made her happy and she smiled. "Thank you. I believe it reached the villagers." "You did well, Ino," Gaara added with a nod at her. He turned back to Sai, who had just arrived during his broadcasted message. "There was something you wanted to say?" Sai nodded. "I've sent a message with one of my drawings back to the Leaf. It should arrive in another day." "That's great," Tenten said, suddenly excited. "If it gets there that fast, then we can call for backup as well." "What did you say to them?" "I requested for backup after I informed them of the situation," Sai answered. Kiba sent a look his way, crossing his arms. "And where were you at other than that? I never smelled your scent while the rest of us were fighting." Sai smiled at him. "You should mind your own business, dog breath. Your clothes don't look like the others, so I can tell you didn't do as much as them." Kiba grew red and glared harshly. "What the hell did you say?" He threw a fist at his smiling face, but Sakura stepped in front of him and grabbed his fist. Kiba glared at her, trying to fight against her strength. "Get out of my way," he gritted. "No, Kiba. I want you to stop," she said sternly, pushing his entire body back by his fist. "This is not the time to be fighting." Kiba's fist shook violent at his sides. "Why the hell do you keep defending them?" he yelled. "Both them are reasons we lost comrades." "Why you lost Sasuke?" Sakura visibly flinched at the mention of her lost teammate, flicking her gaze away from him. Kiba immediately felt bad, but his anger took over his better judgment and he turned to walk away. "Screw this." "Kiba, wait." Hinata called after him to no avail. He didn't even acknowledge her. "Let him go," Shino told her. "He needs to calm down. Then he'll come back on his own." Shikamaru sighed, his gaze flickering between Kiba and Sakura. "What a drag," he intoned. "Triple X." As the others conversed after having met up, Niji had split from Tenten and used his Byakugan to search all the places of high chakra signature, specifically where the Akatsuki had been fighting. He'd hoped to gain some insight on their abilities to find a suitable way to counter without revealing much of his own. In case one would escape after fighting him and revealed their battle to their teammates. As he went into the slight flaming council room, he saw someone else was there as well. He activated his Byakugan when the man turned around to him, with dark red eyes. Sharingan eyes. Sasuke turned to see Niji, staring into those bland, focused eyes as they seemed to almost glare at him. Now, he was itching to battle. This battle was supposed to have taken place a long time ago. Almost 3 years ago. Sasuke Uchiha. Niji Fuga. The two regarded the other one by name, a sign of respect between not only two fighters, but two Jujutsu users. "I didn't expect to see you here. Will I also be expecting Orochimaru as well?" Sasuke looked blank, not bothered by the obvious jab. "I'm not here to fight you. Not yet. The Chunin exams is another thing entirely. You think you can just show up here and enter like this?" Niji's mind went back to how hurt Naruto was. How much pain he suffered through, just to bring this lowlife back to the village. He remembered how much Sasuke hurt Naruto when all he wanted was for him to come home and forget about all the pain he was going through. Neji snarled at the thought and suddenly raced forward with speed that dispersed the remaining flames from Pakura's attack, aiming a palm. You don't deserve it. Sasuke's eyes widened at the speed of his opponent and he tried to fully turn his body so he could counterattack, but found out he was not as fast as Neji. He was nearly hit in the gut before a shadow appeared right in front of him. Neji's own eyes widened in shock as his palm was slapped away with ease. As he fell in what almost seemed to be slow motion, he saw that it was Kakashi who had done it. Neji stumbled off balance but he quickly gained it and stood upright, surprised to see Kakashi. Kakashi-sensei? What are you doing here? I was told to escort Sasuke. Don't attack him. He's part of the Hidden Sound Village. It will cause a war between us. Kakashi told him sternly. Hidden Stone Village? Why are they treating that like an actual shinobi village? Neji's eyes widened. They couldn't be serious. You mean to tell me that he's actually participating in the Chunin exams? As part of the Sound Village. A team of 2 shinobi arrived through the roof of the building, landing beside Sasuke. Neji recognized them from the previous Chunin exams. One of them fought Sasuke and the other had fought Kankuro. Is everything okay, Sasuke-sama? Yoroi asked, eyeing both Leaf Shinobi. These two didn't dash. I'm fine. Sasuke responded, giving a knowing look to Neji. Nothing happened. We just ran into each other. He turned away from the two, looking back at where the flames had been before they flickered out. The Akatsuki. Danzo. After I destroy the leaf, they are next on the list. Triple X. A shinobi grinned as blood trailed down his arm. In his hand was one of the guards of the capital city, choking on his own blood. It's time to destroy this wretched city to rubble. All of these pitiful circumstances are because of what the daimyo allowed. I won't let his son follow in his footsteps. He dropped the shinobi on the ground and walked undeterred through the gate. Behind him, multiple blood shinobi guards were all left behind, most of them completely separated from their limbs. Chapter 64. A day had passed in the Sand Village. Much of it was spent actually restoring the village to its former glory. While all citizens helped with reconstruction, it primarily fell onto Gaara as he was the only one who could control the sand and therefore fix the village. Sakura wished they were as lucky back when Orochimaru and Danzo attacked the village. In a hospital room, Shikamaru watched intently as 4 dripped in a slow rhythm and a beep from the heart monitor came in a constant and calm manner. Temari was in the hospital bed with an oxygen mask covering her face and parts of her body wrapped up to cover up the burns. Sakura, with the help of sand personnel, did the best they could for her and now only had to wait until she woke up to see any results. Shikamaru had yet to leave the hospital room. Heavy bags were under his eyes and he felt exhausted, but he couldn't find it in himself to go to sleep. He didn't get there in time. He almost allowed her to die while he was running around doing nothing. He knew it was illogical, but he couldn't help but blame himself for this. Shikamaru turned to the door as he heard a click and it swung open. Choji walked through the door and immediately frowned upon seeing him. He opened his mouth to speak but was cut off. I know what you're going to say. I'm not sleepy. You look horrible. Choji wasn't usually blunt, but he felt that it was needed. You haven't slept at all, have you? Look at her, Choji. His eyes went back to Temari's unmoving form. How could I? Choji sighed and walked to him, stepping between him and Temari and grasped his shoulder. You want to help her, be ready to fight the enemy when they come back. They didn't accomplish their goal. You won't be able to help if you're looking like this. Get yourself together. Shikamaru's eyes widened slightly. Choji was right. This wasn't the way he needed go about this. Shikamaru stood up before his best friend. Thanks, I'll take your advice. He looked back over at Temari. Just a bit more time, okay? Choji nodded and walked out with a small smile on his face. Shikamaru sighed, staying like that for a couple of more minutes before walking out of the room. As soon as he did, he was met with a glare from Tayuya as she leaned on the wall across from the room, arms crossed. She didn't look happy, but when did she ever? "What is it?" he asked, feeling weird from the look she was giving him. Tayuya didn't know why she was so damn angry. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly, and she tried her damned hardest to not let it show, but she was quickly losing that control the more she thought about just how long Shikamaru had been in the room with her. She didn't know why she was so bothered by it. But she felt pissed off just thinking about it. Suddenly, she snarled and pushed off the wall and pushed Shikamaru against the door. He expected her to try and hit him, but she simply turned and stomped away. He stared at her until she moved out of sight, walking around a corner. What was that all about? He muttered to himself. Triple X. Sakura was back in the room she shared with her other teammates, gripping her fist with her other hand as he feet tapped repeatedly on the floor. Damn Kiba. What he said just couldn't escape her head. It was all she could think about. She tried her damned best not to think about Sasuke all these years. Now not only had Kiba brought up that comment, she had heard that Sasuke had arrived with a team to compete in the Chunin exams. Deidara had made the decision the night before that he would continue on with the scheduled exams despite the risk instead of sending all the shinobi from multiple parts of the world home. But truthfully, she regretted he made that decision. How could she face Sasuke after all these years? She was scared, wondering how he would be like being under Orochimaru for nearly 3 years. How much would he change? A shaky breath escaped her as she exhaled, trying to calm herself. What do I do? Naruto isn't here. As soon as that thought came to her, she heard a knock at her door. She looked toward it. Come in. She said with a light blush, the first word coming out as a mess. When the door opened, she didn't expect to see her sensei on the other end. Her eyes widened. Sensei? What are you doing here? Hands stuffed in his pockets, the copy ninja used his foot to close the door behind him and he walked to stand beside his sitting student as they looked out the window which had a surprisingly nice view of the village. It smells like tears in here. Kakashi pointed out and she flinched before looking down with red cheeks, embarrassed. He sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't find out before I had the chance to tell you. She looked up at him. It's okay, sensei. It isn't your fault. Kakashi wanted to say it was. This entire situation wouldn't have happened if he didn't allow his student to get corrupted. But Sakura was too stubborn to let him take the blame all by himself. He wanted to smile when he thought about that. He had a really good student. We don't have much time, Sakura. He looked down at her with one eye to gauge her reaction to his next words. I was the one who brought Sasuke here. After we had fought. Sakura's eyes widened in shock and she turned to her sensei, feeling nauseous at the thought of it. A feeling bubbled in her gut. What? Why? He's strong, Sakura. Stronger than you in almost every way. Sakura lowered her gaze to the floor slowly, feeling all the confidence she had built over the years shatter all at once. Even after all this training, she was still no match for him. For right now, that is. Eyes slightly damp, she met her sensei's lone eye. We have a couple of days to prepare. You told me way back when you first started your training with Tsunade that you were going to be the one to bring Sasuke back. Remember? She felt that memory come to her as if it were happening right now. She stepped up before Tsunade, beaten and battered from multiple hits from her teacher but now forcing her body to go on instead of giving up. Kakashi watched from the sidelines intently, watching every move she made. Is that all you got in you, Sakura? She turned to him and the next words that came out of her mouth chilled him to the bone. She pointed to herself the same way Naruto used to. No. I'm the one who's going to bring Sasuke back. Naruto had his turn, he failed, so now it's my turn. And I won't waste it. I'll become the strongest kunoichi in the entire village if I have. Sasuke is coming home. Sakura nodded, and Kakashi continued. Those words you said always remained in me. I wanted to capture him myself because he was my student, but then I saw the conviction you had to push yourself to become strong enough that you wouldn't be in the way of Naruto and Sasuke fight. You want to be a part of it, leading it. Your dream inspired me, Sakura. Her eyes widened at his admission. She never thought words like this would ever come out of his mouth. He held a hand out for her to grab. It's time to train, Sakura. Sasuke is waiting for you. She smiled, determination lighting up her gaze. She didn't need Naruto to be here. Not to help her, not to defend her, and not to bring Sasuke back. She could do all of that on her own. She grabbed her sensei's hand. It was time to train. Triple X. You're already up. Tenten exclaimed. She had tried to go and see how her teammate was doing in his hospital room only to see that he was already fully awoke and training, doing handstand push-ups while wrapped in heavy bandages. Oh. 348, Tenten. 349, what? 350, are you doing here? 351, he said in between counting every time he pushed himself up. I came here to check on you. She said, walking up to him and putting her hands on her hip. Now get down and in the bed. She yelled. You have to rest your body. He, however, was completely focused on his counting as sweat dripped down his face onto the floor. I'm sorry, Tenten, but no can do. I must train for the upcoming tournament. Our dear friend Gaara has made the announcement that it would resume. I can't afford to grow weaker lying down. Tenten sighed, hating this stubborn side of him. He never listened. Geez, you're so stubborn. Just take it easy, okay? For me? Of course. He yelled out before continuing his sets, and Tenten nodded, walking out of the door. He's been training so hard to catch up to Neji. I want to believe in him, but Neji just seems like a level that is impossible to pass. Her eyes softened. She didn't want to tell him that. While Rock Lee didn't show it, he was more vulnerable than he let on. He pushed himself all his life to grow stronger to beat the considered genius, but Neji was a genius among geniuses. She couldn't fathom the idea that someone could reach that level all on their own. She looked at herself. She was the weakest member of her team. She'd always been. She made improvements to herself. Made herself an inventor, inventing new weapons since she was just like Rock Lee. A failure. But there was a difference between her and Lee. She could not see past her failures and try to grow no matter what, like he did. She wouldn't dare try to surpass a genius. Being around Neji made her feel weak, insignificant even. The Chunin exams are a corner away. How can I become one if I don't surpass my limits and grow? She clenched her hand into a tight fist, glaring at it. What would she do if she had to fight Neji? She knew the answer already. I have to surpass my limits. I have to try and beat Neji. She was going to have to find herself a trainer. Triple X. Sasuke felt annoyed. Very, very annoyed. He'd remain hidden in the slums of the Sand Village, finding himself and his team a small hut for a base. It wouldn't do well to run into any of his old comrades. Too many complicated emotions and no desire for them to be sorted out. He was annoyed because he was hiding. Even though it was his idea, he still felt satisfaction on taking it out on his teammates, forcing them to find things to eat and all of that. He saw alone, the daylight outside the only thing lighting the otherwise dark room. He stuck to the shadows. It was easier not to be seen. He fumbled with the guards on his wrist, bored. Sitting here was the only thing he was going to do until the tournament. Becoming a Chunin wasn't his goal. His goal was only to find out just how strong shinobi in the leaf were. It was important for his goals. His goal to destroy the village, that is. It was a morbid goal, yes, but a goal he felt was worth pursuing. People who killed their own didn't deserve to live. That's how he saw it. He slid his white shirt back over his armguard and stood up. He brought his gaze upward just as a rush of chakra reached him. He had felt it way before it reached him, and initially found it a threat until it got a bit closer to him. Then he felt it was something unavoidable. He was right. A familiar voice rang through his head. Sasuke, I know I've reached you. Come to my office. We need to talk. The transmission is cut off, though Sasuke waited if the voice was going to say more. He didn't need to see who had sent the message. It was crystal clear. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. HN. A voice too familiar for his liking. A second later, he was gone. When he came to, he was in the Kazekage's office. Gaara seemed to have expected him, having already been looking just at the place he transported to. Did he sense him before he'd gotten here? His Sharingan blazed and he leapt back, avoiding a hailstorm of blades that would have sliced through him and killed him. They were impeded deep into the ground. Yep, that definitely would have killed him. They seemed to be startled that he had both sensed their presence and moved away to avoid all four of them. They inched forward, and from the way their shins tensed, he could tell they were going to attack him one more. This time, he wouldn't allow it. He'd kill them. Umbu, stop. Gaara commanded with a raised hand. Instantly, they all froze. I invited him here. Back to your positions, please. A nod was all he received before they leapt back up the ceiling at once, seeming sinking into it. Sasuke watched with silent curiosity. Slipping into the shadows like that was no ordinary feat, definitely Umbu-level shinobi. His Sharingan would have probably missed them if he hadn't personally seen them go there. An interest jutsu to say the least. One definitely worth copying some other time. His gaze slowly went back to Gaara's. It seemed the teen Kage hadn't took his eyes away from him. Smart on his part. Could he perhaps sense his strength despite him hiding it away? He had allowed his chakra to go high enough to get here quickly. Perhaps he had a glimpse of it? If he did, he surely didn't show it. His face remained on constant blank with eyes to match. Perhaps he was overthinking it. You've grown stronger since our battle, Sasuke Uchiha. He commented slowly. Okay. Perhaps not. You as well. Gaara. Sasuke felt his hand twitch unconsciously underneath the cloak covering his entire outfit. The Umbu above twitched when he spoke in blatant disrespect of their leader. He was grateful for that cloak. Gaara might have reacted otherwise. But he decided to be more cautious with his wording. He didn't like to be surprised like that. Gaara only continued to stare. Either he didn't notice the movement, or he didn't care to say anything about it. Sasuke guessed it to be the latter. Your presence was a surprise to me, Sasuke. Being that you were an A-rank Rouge ninja, when I say your name on the list of contenders, I thought it was some sort of mistake. Then I learn Orochimaru has created his own village and is trying to officially make you a Chunin. Gaara finally changed the look on his face. He frowned. Truthfully, I wish to corner you here and stop Orochimaru in his tracks. I've come to the conclusion that part of his grand plan involves you, just like before. Whether you know this or not. Then I thought about my friend, your teammate Naruto. Sasuke tried his damned hardest not to react to that damned name. Hopefully Gaara wouldn't notice how he tightened up. He was the one who wanted to bring you back. Both he and Sakura. Gaara closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. For their sake, as their friend, I'm allowing you to participate in this year's exam and acknowledge the Sound Village as a new ninja village. Suddenly, his eyes opened and the gaze he locked with Sasuke's was intense. But do not believe for a second that you will not be watched until you are to leave. Orochimaru is someone I won't cooperate with. As such, you will be monitored wherever you go. Normally, Sasuke wouldn't like what he just heard. Truthfully, he didn't. But something he noticed about this conversation irked him enough for him to take his mind off of that for a bit. After all, he would have plenty of time to hate it when being tailed by whatever random shinobi Gaara chose. Well, if he could keep up with him. He mentally made a note to burn the small hut down after this. It wouldn't do for them to have a chakra trail. But it was likely Gaara had already sent someone to gather it. Gaara sighed. I'll summon you back here when we've settled on the location spot of the exams. He reached under his desk. Sasuke sensed no ill intent and kept steady, and Gaara pulled out an envelope, sliding it to the edge of his desk. Sasuke narrowed his gaze at it. He saw no chakra coming from it. So no trap. He looked back up at Gaara, a silent question hanging in the air. Gaara seemed to catch on without missing a beat. At ease, Sasuke. This is simply money for you to spend as you like. It's enough to live and have food in the village for as long as the exams are. I realize you won't be staying anywhere where I assigned you, so I took measures for that. Be grateful, Rouge. TCH, Sasuke glared at the small jab, but kept his mouth shut. It wouldn't do to antagonize him in his own village. Besides, he'd heard stories about Gaara's newfound strength as the Kazekage. He was sure if he could beat him like before. He walked up slowly to the letter and dragged it off the desk, immediately taking steps back away. He didn't trust this a single bit. Is that all? He asked, stuffing the envelope into his cloak. Gaara closed his eyes and sighed. Yes, that's it. Immediately, Sasuke's body flickered out. The farther away, the better. He reappeared back to his hut in the slums. His mind briefly went back to his thoughts about destroying it, but before then, he took the envelope out his cloak. Why did he give this to him? Sasuke didn't simply believe Gaara wanted to help him. Speaking of him, he was much different from the Gaara he knew 2 years ago. He snorted. That idiot really changed him. Triple X. Obito didn't think it was possible. He lost. He didn't lose much these days. Not many could contend with him. He hadn't been trying his hardest, but the fact that his 3 former students bested him when he was trying this much said a lot about what he knew. They were strong, stronger than most of the world. Truly, only shinobi like Kakashi, Guy, and, well, he didn't know more than that actually. Perhaps the Akatsuki? They were strong. Stronger than they had been under him from what he heard. He'd yet to come across any of them, but he'd be sure to have that changed. He stood to his feet, frowning a bit as he slightly wobbled. Damn, he was a bit more hurt than he thought, but he already felt his body returning back to normal. His injuries were already healed, his stamina was what he was waiting on. So, Sensei, Shursui started between gasp of air, laying on his back in cool grass. We won. I can see. He looked over to see Azumi's tired face, hair sticking to her face and sweat dripping to the floor. Just like Shursui, she was lying on the ground, trying to regain her breath. Will you now speak? Itachi asked. Though sweat dripped down his face, he looked no less ready to receive the answers of the questions he'd been searching for so long. Obito sighed, but nodded nonetheless. Get up you two. You'll probably want to hear this sitting upright than lying down. He took a brief glance around the clearing and found the river that traveled through the training field not too far away. Meet me there, he said, gesturing to it. Then we'll talk. He turned to walk away, wanting to use that time to gather his thoughts. Shursui groaned in exhaustion as he sat up in the ground. His body really didn't want him to be moving around anymore. High-speed body flickers really put a lot of strain on the body. Even for a master like him. Come on, guys. Itachi egged. Sensei's is waiting. As well as our answers. Shursui nodded and stretched out his back. Alright, I'm good. Itachi turned to Azumi, but she had yet to get up yet. She still was tired as all knows hell. She was a combat specialist with her very own ninja taijutsu to boot. But keeping pace with her sensei and combining attacks with Shursui left her body a wreck. Ouch, she groaned as she stood to full height, rubbing her stomach. A few hard kicks from sensei was to thank for that. The bruising would probably take a bit to heal itself, even with Rin's help. They all walked over to the river, taking their seats beside one another on a rock, letting their feet cool in the spring water. Obito sat apart from them, a heavy frown marring his features, but it was one of concentration, not unhappiness. Then he sighed, scratching at his head. Honestly, I have no idea how I'm going to start all this. Izumi smiled softly. Take your time, sensei. Internally smiling at the words, Obito steeled himself. Then, he spoke. Triple X. Meanwhile, Shino found himself following after his hot-headed teammate. Despite being in a different village, it didn't take long for him to find where exactly Kiba would go. His bugs were also a big help as well. Shino watched as the canine user stomped around the clearing, cursing aloud about what had happened not too long ago. Hearing footsteps behind him, he turned around to see familiar faces. Ino, Hinata, and the new girl whose chakra felt a lot like his. She was interesting. He was still trying to figure her out. I see you've come as well. Has there been any word of Niji? He asked. Hinata shook her head. And no. I couldn't find him and I felt I've looked everywhere. Well, he's got to be somewhere. Ino said with a frown, crossing her arms. It's not like he'll just up and leave. The Chunin exams are still coming. I don't think he would miss it. I don't either. Shino said, looking back at the fuming Kiba who sat harshly on rock then rubbed his but because of the sharp rock. I believe he'll show face when the exams start. I've yet to piece together why he would leave, however. He's probably training. Fu said as she grinned, punching her fist into her other palm. Those Akatsuki guys were strong. He's already preparing for them makes me want to fight him. Maybe we can become training buddies. Or maybe he's just being stupid. Ino suggested otherwise with a sigh as she rubbed her forehead. I swear I can never understand the silent type as much as I love them. Anyways, she continued as she turned to Kiba sitting down, now rubbing the top of Akamaru's head. So what are we going to do about Hot Head? The longer he and Sakura argue will only drag us down. I know I'm not the smartest, but even I know that the Akatsuki are likely to attack once more at the exams. It'll only get worse if we don't fix it now. It's too early. Shino said. It might be best to let it simmer a bit, it just happened after all. Well, I don't think so. Ino interrupted with a pointed stare. And I know people better than you. Shino only glanced at her briefly. Okay. Ino gaped at him when he began to walk away. Hey, wait. Shino, stop. Where are you? She stopped trying to call after him when he disappeared, walking down the hill. She sighed and rubbed that back of her head. That's my bad. I shouldn't have said that. It's okay, Ino. Hinata said, tapping her index fingers together. He just needs space right now. He won't stay mad. If you say so. She didn't look too convinced, but already had a goal for today. She turned back to where Kiba was but found the spot completely empty. Fu blinked. What the hell? Ino yelled as she stomped her feet. Where'd dog breath run off to now? Geez. Come on girls. We're going after him. Yay. Fu cheered, raising her arms up in excitement and her wings fluttered behind her. Triple X. Damn it. A loud slam was heard and then books tumbled to the ground. This is worse than I thought. Shizen looked at her teacher in worry as she gripped her head tightly. She knew that she had been worrying and hoping for world from the sand, but now that she got it, she couldn't help but get angry at it. What was she expecting? The Akatsuki attacked, but no one was seriously injured and all the Jinchurikis remained safe. There wasn't more one could ask for. To her right, she could see from his face that Asuma was a bit worried himself. Even the kids that had burst into the room were on edge and silent. Tsunade rose her head up to meet Asuma's eyes. Asuma, the situation in the capital is likely to become disastrous if our first move isn't right now. I don't have a lot of jounin left to send with you there. I'm hoping you can lead a group of Chunin to help you. That shouldn't be difficult, Asuma said after a moment's thought. But I would like for my team you'll be small. Izumo and Kotetsu are the shinobi I would prefer to come with me. Are they able to leave watch duty to someone else? Tsunade went through a couple of files strewn about her desk before shaking her head with a frown. No, I'm afraid not. The gate must be watched by capable eyes in case attacks from Danzo, the Akatsuki, or Orochimaru. We can't afford to get blindsided anymore. Is there anyone else you have in mind? Asuma thought once more and then he smirked. What about these four right here? He gestured to Team Ebisu. Said team leader's eyes nearly shot from his skull and he turned to Asuma in disbelief. Are you out of your mind, Asuma? You can't be seriously considering my team to replace a squad of Chunin. I am. He confirmed with a smirk. It's a bit risky, yes. The daimyo's probably not going to like it as I know he'd rather have an experienced team, but the new generation needs experience. The Konoha 12 popped into his mind as he continued. We're pushing the next generation to be stronger than the last. This might be a B-rank mission that could possibly get out of hand, but Dashi turned to Team Ebisu, but his gaze lingered on one of them. I feel that they are up for the task. Uncle Asuma. Konohamaru looked at him in silent astonishment. Moegi gulped heavily, her nerves now jittery as she thought about taking a mission above in C-rank. Udon felt the pit of his stomach drop as he went slightly pale. He turned back to Tsunade, no longer smirking. I will take this mission, Tsunade. I promise to bring it to a success. I'll stake my name and status on it. Tsunade couldn't help her eyes widening. She felt as if she was no longer looking at Asuma. Then a ghost of her former teacher formed over him before disappearing as if it were never there. But somehow she knew he was watching. Tsunade felt the split in her mouth as her body shook in amusement. She finally stopped chuckling to herself and cleared her throat, looking at the Sarutobi with all seriousness. I expect a job well done on my desk when you come back. She turned playful eyes on the younger Sarutobi. And you, brat. No dying on me. After all, won't I be seeing you become Hokage? Despite the nervousness creeping at the back of his mind, he couldn't help but crack a smile. Like his teacher, he raised a fist at her. Don't you worry, old lady. Once Naruto Niken has warmed the seat up for me, I'll be the 7th. His smile widened. Believe it. Shizen covered her mouth as chuckles threatened to spill out. She really missed Naruto. And this boy reminded her of him so much. He really took after him. TCH, cheeky brat. She muttered before shaking her head. Her eyes shot to the other two genin and they visibly flinched. And you too. Keep on your toes and follow instructions given by your Jonin senseis. Ebisu, I would like you to accompany your team as well. No point in having you here. He nodded. Of course, Lady Hokage. Now you're to leave immediately after packing. I will be getting you access to guest rooms in the daimyo's palace. Don't cause a ruckus. Her eyes shot to Konohamaru. Understand? Konohamaru frowned at her tone. He could be quiet. But he settled with a nod instead, not wanting to be a victim of her headlocks. Yes, ma'am. Good. You're dismissed. When the shinobi filed out of the room, Tsunade looked over at a smiling Shizune and frowned in annoyance. What's with that look? You're putting a lot of trust into Konohamaru. Somehow, her smile widened. I'm so happy to see how much you've changed, my lady. Tsunade couldn't help but smile herself, thinking about the two brats that changed her. Those two are the embodiment of the will of fire for their generation. Both of them are bound to be leaders of them. Sensei always put his trust in the will of fire, so I will put my trust that they can triumph over any adversary in their way. Side by side, stood the men who had ever taken the Hokage seat. Hashirama Senju, Tobirama Senju, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and Minato Namikaze stood in her vision with their backs turned, showing off their Kage insignia. Each generation entrusts the will of fire to the next. That is how we remain strong, even after everything we've been through. Another vision popped up as that one faded. Naruto and Konohamaru stood back to back, holding a hand to their hearts as a bright light radiated from each spot. Those two are the future of the Leaf. The future 6th and 7th Hokage. Side note, this is the end for now. If the author updates more, I will post more.